Tommy Rodriguez had always been the kid who asked too many questions. While other 16-year-olds at Jefferson High School were worried about football games and weekend parties, Tommy spent his nights watching documentaries about space exploration. His bedroom walls were covered with posters of the International Space Station and Mars rovers. But it wasn't just a hobby. Tommy had a dream that most people thought was way too big for a kid from their small town. The science fair was coming up, and everyone in Mr. Harrison's class was buzzing about their projects. Tommy sat in the back row, listening to his classmates pitch their ideas. Brittany was doing something with growing crystals. Jake wanted to build a robot arm. Nothing wrong with those projects, but Tommy had something different in mind. Something that most people would probably think was crazy. When it was his turn to share, Tommy stood up slowly. His hands were sweating. He could already feel the eyes on him, and he knew what was coming. "I want to design a water filtration system for long-term space missions," he said quietly. The classroom went silent for about 3 seconds. Then someone in the front row snorted. A few giggles broke out. Tommy felt his face getting hot. "Space missions?" Jake called out from his seat. "Dude, this is a high school science fair, not NASA." More laughter. Even Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable. The teacher cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Tommy, that's very ambitious. Maybe too ambitious. Have you considered something more manageable? You know, something you can actually complete in 6 weeks?" Tommy wanted to explain. He wanted to tell them about all the research he'd been doing, about how astronauts on long missions to Mars would need better ways to recycle water, about the articles he'd been reading from actual scientific journals. But the words got stuck in his throat as more students laughed. "Let him do it," Brittany said with a smirk. "It'll be funny to watch." That night, Tommy sat in his garage, which doubled as his workshop. His mom was working the night shift at the hospital again. She'd been picking up extra hours ever since his dad left 3 years ago. Money was tight, really tight. Tommy knew he couldn't ask her for funds to buy fancy equipment like some of the other kids had, but that was okay. Tommy had learned to be creative. His workspace was filled with things other people had thrown away. Old PVC pipes from a construction site dumpster, a broken aquarium pump he'd fixed, plastic containers from the recycling bin, glass jars of all sizes. If someone else saw it, they'd probably think it looked like a junkyard. To Tommy, it was possibility. He'd been working on his filtration idea for almost 2 years, ever since he'd read an article about how difficult it was to keep water clean on the space station. The current systems worked, but they were heavy and used a lot of energy. Tommy thought there might be a better way, using something called biofilm technology, basically using helpful bacteria to clean water naturally, the way nature did it in rivers and wetlands. Most kids his age couldn't explain what biofilm was. Tommy had taught himself by reading research papers online, watching university lectures on YouTube at 2 in the morning, and sending questions to professors who sometimes actually wrote back. He'd failed so many times he'd lost count. His first 10 prototypes had leaked, clogged, or grown the wrong kind of bacteria. But each failure taught him something new. Around midnight, his mom came home and found him still working. Her scrubs were wrinkled and she looked exhausted. But she smiled when she saw him hunched over his project. "Baby, you should be sleeping," she said, setting down her purse. "Almost done with this part, Mom. Just 10 more minutes." She walked over and looked at the mess of pipes and containers. Tommy knew she didn't really understand what he was building, but she never told him it was stupid or impossible. "You really think this can work?" she asked softly. "I know it can," Tommy said. "I just need to prove it." His mom squeezed his shoulder. "Just promise me you won't feel too bad if those judges don't get it. Sometimes people can't see what's special right in front of them." Tommy nodded, but inside he was determined. He didn't need the judges to love it. He just needed them to see that it worked. The next 6 weeks were brutal. Tommy barely slept. He'd go to school, come home, do homework as fast as possible, then head straight to the garage. His grades started slipping in other classes. His few friends stopped inviting him to hang out because he always said no. At school, kids had started calling him Astronaut Boy as a joke. The worst part was that Mr. Harrison kept pulling him aside with helpful suggestions. Maybe Tommy should add some colorful posters to make it look better. Maybe he should simplify his explanation so people could understand it. Maybe he should have a backup project just in case. Tommy understood what his teacher really meant. He was being too weird, Too ambitious. Too different. He should stay in his lane and do something normal, but Tommy couldn't stop. Every night in that garage, he was getting closer. His prototype was actually starting to work. The water that came out the other end was cleaner than what went in. The bacteria colonies were stable. The energy consumption was way lower than traditional filters. On paper, at least, his design could actually help astronauts. 2 days before the science fair, Tommy finished his display board. It wasn't fancy. He'd printed everything at the library because his home printer was broken. He'd used cardboard from old boxes. While other students were getting professional boards printed at copy shops, Tommy was working with whatever he could afford, which was basically nothing. He loaded everything into his mom's old car the morning of the fair. His prototype fit in a plastic storage bin. His display board was rolled up carefully. He had a binder full of research and calculations. As they drove to the convention center where the regional fair was being held, Tommy felt his stomach doing flips. "You nervous?" his mom asked. "Terrified," Tommy admitted. "Good," she said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "That means you care. Now go show them what you've got." Tommy carried his project inside, trying to ignore how his hands were shaking. Around him, other students were setting up projects that looked like they'd cost hundreds of dollars. Professional banners, fancy equipment, perfect presentations. Then there was Tommy, with his recycled materials and handwritten labels. He found his assigned table in the back corner. Of course it was in the back corner. He started setting up, carefully arranging his prototype and display board. A few students walked by and glanced at his project. Tommy saw them exchange looks and whisper to each other. He knew what they were thinking. That weird kid and his junk pile space project? But Tommy stood up straight and kept working. The judging would start in an hour. This was his moment to prove everyone wrong, or so he thought. The convention center was packed with students, parents, and judges. Tommy stood behind his table, watching everyone else get ready. At the table next to him, a girl named Ashley had a project about solar energy that looked like it belonged in a museum. Across the aisle, some kid from the private school had built a working robotic hand with his dad, who was apparently an engineer. Everything was shiny and professional. Tommy looked down at his own project. His water filtration system sat there in a clear plastic container, a tangle of tubes and pumps that he'd built from spare parts. His display board was neat, but it was obviously homemade. The poster paper was slightly wrinkled. His printed photos were a little blurry because he'd used the cheapest setting at the library. The announcement came over the loudspeaker. Judging would begin in 5 minutes. Tommy's heart started pounding. He'd practiced his presentation dozens of times in the garage, but now his mind felt blank. He checked his prototype one more time, making sure everything was connected properly. He pressed the button and water started flowing through the system. Good. At least it was working. The judges moved through the aisles in groups of 3. Tommy watched them stop at other tables, nodding and smiling, taking notes on their clipboards. They spent a lot of time at the fancy projects. The solar energy one, the robotic hand, a chemical analysis project that had real lab equipment. Finally, 3 judges approached Tommy's table. One was an older woman with gray hair and reading glasses hanging around her neck. The second was a man in a suit who looked bored already. The third was younger, maybe a teacher from another school. "Good morning," Tommy said, trying to sound confident. His voice came out a little shaky. "Good morning," the woman said politely. "What do we have here?" Tommy took a deep breath. "This is a biofilm-based water filtration system designed for long-term space missions. Current filtration systems on spacecraft use a lot of energy and are very heavy. My design uses beneficial bacteria to naturally purify water, reducing energy consumption by approximately 60% while maintaining the same water quality standards." The judges looked at his prototype. The man in the suit was already checking his watch. "Space missions?" the younger judge said, sounding skeptical. "That's quite ambitious." "Yes, sir," Tommy said. "I've been researching this for 2 years. The bacteria I'm using are similar to what naturally occurs in wetland environments. They break down contaminants without needing harsh chemicals or lots of electricity." The woman judge squinted at his display board. "Where did you conduct your research?" "Which laboratory?" "My garage," Tommy admitted. "I built everything myself using recycled materials." The judges exchanged glances. Tommy saw the look. He'd seen it before. "So this poor kid is in over his head look." And how did you ensure proper sterilization and scientific controls? The man in the suit asked, not even looking at Tommy anymore. I followed protocols from published research papers. I documented everything in this binder. Tommy held up his 3-ring binder, stuffed with printed articles, handwritten notes, and photos of his experiments. The woman flipped through a few pages, but Tommy could tell she wasn't really reading them. This is very creative, she said in that tone adults use when they don't want to hurt your feelings. Very imaginative. They asked 2 more quick questions, barely waiting for Tommy's answers. Then they thanked him and moved on. The whole thing took maybe 4 minutes. Tommy watched them spend 15 minutes at the next table, where some kid had made a volcano that shot colored foam. A volcano. The most basic science fair project in existence. As the morning went on, Tommy had to present his project a few more times to different judge groups. Each time was the same. Polite smiles. Quick questions. Barely hidden skepticism. Nobody seemed to care that his design actually worked. Nobody wanted to look at his research data. They saw the handmade display board and the recycled materials, and they'd already made up their minds. During lunch break, Tommy sat alone at his table while other students gathered in groups. He could hear them laughing and comparing projects. A few tables away, he saw Jake and some other kids from his school. They were pointing at his project and cracking up. "Check out Astronaut Boy's pile of junk," Jake said, loud enough for Tommy to hear. "Dude thinks he's gonna work for NASA." More laughter. Tommy felt his face burning. He wanted to pack up and leave right then, just grab his stuff and get out before the humiliation got worse. But his mom had taken the day off work to be here. She was somewhere in the crowd, probably getting coffee. He couldn't bail on her. In the afternoon, awards started. They called third place first, some kid with a plant growth experiment. Then second place, the robotic hand project. Tommy wasn't surprised. Then they announced first place, the solar energy project. Ashley ran up to accept her trophy and everyone applauded. She deserved it. Her project was good. They announced a few honorable mentions. Tommy's name wasn't called. Not even close. After the ceremony ended, students started packing up. Tommy carefully disassembled his prototype, wrapping each piece in newspaper so nothing would break. His mom appeared carrying 2 cups of coffee. "How'd it go, baby?" she asked. Tommy couldn't look at her. "I didn't place. Not even honorable mention." His mom set down the coffee and pulled him into a hug right there in the convention center. Tommy was 16 and almost taller than her now, but he still felt like a little kid who'd gotten his feelings hurt on the playground. "Those judges are idiots," she whispered fiercely. "You worked harder than anyone here." "It doesn't matter," Tommy said, pulling away. They were right. This was stupid. I should have done something normal. On the drive home, Tommy stared out the window. His mom tried to cheer him up, but he wasn't hearing it. All he could think about was Jake's laughter, the judge's dismissive looks, the way everyone had treated his project like it was a joke. That night at school, things got worse. Tommy had known it would. Jake had recorded a video of Tommy's project setup and posted it online with the caption, "NASA reject." This dude really thought he'd win with trash from his garage. By Monday morning, half the school had seen it. As Tommy walked through the hallways, he heard the whispers, saw the smirks. Someone had even made a meme out of one of his display board photos. The comments were brutal. "Maybe stick to normal people science. My man really said space missions. This is what happens when you watch too much Star Trek." In Mr. Harrison's class, the teacher tried to be encouraging. "Tommy, you should be proud of yourself for trying something different. Not everyone has to win," but that just made it worse. The teacher's pity was somehow more embarrassing than the mockery. Tommy nodded and stared at his desk until class ended. For the next 3 weeks, Tommy avoided everyone. He ate lunch in the library. He took different hallways to class. At home, he couldn't even look at his garage workshop. All those late nights, all that research, all that hope, for nothing. His prototype sat in pieces in the plastic storage bin. His display board was rolled up in the corner, and Tommy thought about throwing it away. Maybe burning it. Anything to erase the evidence of his failure. One Friday night, his mom found him sitting in the garage in the dark. The light was off, and Tommy was just sitting there on an old stool, staring at nothing. She flipped on the light and sat down next to him. "Talk to me," she said. "I was so stupid, Mom. Everyone tried to tell me." Mr. Harrison said it was too ambitious. The kids at school knew it was dumb. Even the judges could see I was just some kid playing scientist. Why didn't I listen? His mom was quiet for a moment. Then she said something Tommy would remember forever. Baby, the world is full of people who will tell you what you can't do. Most of them are scared of anyone who dreams bigger than they do. You didn't fail because your project was bad. You failed because those judges couldn't see past their own expectations. It doesn't change anything, Tommy said. I'm still the school joke. Today you are, his mom agreed. But next week they'll be laughing at someone else. That's how high school works. But your project? That was real. What you built actually worked. Don't let other people's blindness make you throw away something real. Tommy wanted to believe her. But right then, sitting in that garage with his broken dreams in a plastic bin, it felt impossible. He had no idea that in a few weeks, everything would change, that an email was already being drafted, that someone important had actually noticed what everyone else had missed, that the people who laughed at him were about to learn a very important lesson about underestimating the quiet kid in the back of the classroom. But that night, Tommy just felt defeated. He told his mom he was tired and went to bed. He decided he was done with space dreams, done with ambitious projects, done with standing out. He was just going to be normal from now on. Blend in, stop asking questions, stop reaching for impossible things. Sometimes life's biggest turning points happen right after we're ready to give up. Tommy was about to learn that the hard way. 3 weeks passed. Tommy kept his head down at school. He didn't talk about the science fair. When people brought it up to tease him, he just shrugged it off and walked away. He'd stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria entirely. The library became his safe place. His grades were back on track. He'd stopped staying up late in the garage. His mom seemed relieved that he was focusing on regular schoolwork again. But sometimes Tommy caught her looking at him with sad eyes, like she'd watched something die inside him. On a Tuesday morning in late March, Tommy was sitting in English class, half paying attention to a lecture about symbolism in some old book. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Then it buzzed again, and again. He snuck a look under his desk. Text messages from his mom. Call the school office, right now. It's important. Tommy's stomach dropped. His mom never texted him during work hours unless something was wrong. Was she okay? Had something happened? He raised his hand. Can I go to the bathroom? In the hallway, Tommy ran to the nearest bathroom and called his mom. What's wrong? Are you okay? He asked as soon as she picked up. I'm fine, baby. But you need to go to Principal Mitchell's office right now. Why? What did I do? His mom's voice sounded strange. Excited, maybe? You didn't do anything wrong, just go. Trust me. Tommy walked slowly toward the main office, his mind racing. The last time he'd been called to the principal's office was in 9th grade, when he'd accidentally set off the fire alarm during a chemistry experiment. But he hadn't done anything lately. He'd been invisible for weeks. The secretary looked up when he walked in. Tommy Rodriguez? Yes, ma'am. Go right in. Principal Mitchell is waiting for you. This was weird. Really weird. Tommy knocked on the principal's door. Come in. Principal Mitchell was sitting at her desk and she was smiling. Actually smiling. Tommy had seen her smile maybe twice in 3 years, and it was usually at assemblies when she was forcing it for parents. Sit down, Tommy, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Tommy sat. His hands were sweating. Principal Mitchell folded her hands on her desk. Tommy, I have some very interesting news. We received an email this morning from someone at NASA. Tommy blinked. NASA? Like actual NASA? Yes, actual NASA. Johnson Space Center in Houston specifically. She turned her computer monitor so Tommy could see it. There was an email pulled up with an official NASA header. A Dr. Catherine Webb contacted us. She's the lead engineer in their life support systems division. Tommy's brain felt foggy. This didn't make sense. I don't understand. Principal Mitchell's smile got bigger. Apparently, Dr. Webb volunteered as a remote judge for the regional science fair. She was reviewing the online submissions, looking through photos and project descriptions that were uploaded to the fair's website. She came across your project. My project? Tommy's voice came out like a squeak. The water filtration one? That's the one. She was intrigued by your approach, so she requested your full research documentation from the fair organizers. They sent her your binder, the one with all your notes and calculations. Tommy thought about that binder, the one the judges had barely looked at. The one filled with his handwritten notes and printed research papers and photos of failed experiments. Someone from NASA had actually read it? Tommy, Principal Mitchell continued, Dr. Webb says your work is remarkable. She used that exact word. Remarkable. She wants you to present your findings to her engineering team. The room suddenly felt too hot. Tommy pulled at his collar. She wants me to what? They want to set up a video conference call. You would present your project to a group of NASA scientists and engineers, explain your research, answer their questions. They're very interested in your biofilm filtration approach. Tommy just stared at her. This couldn't be real. People didn't go from being the school joke to presenting to NASA. Things like that didn't happen, especially not to kids like him. Is this a prank? Tommy asked. Did Jake put you up to this? Principal Mitchell laughed. I assure you this is completely real. Look. She clicked her mouse and Tommy saw the full email. Official NASA email address, professional signature. Links to Dr. Webb's profile on the NASA website. It was all real. I don't know what to say, Tommy admitted. How about yes? Principal Mitchell suggested. Dr. Webb is available Thursday afternoon. We can set you up in the library conference room with the video call equipment. I'll make sure you're excused from your classes. Tommy nodded slowly. His head was spinning. Okay, yes, I'll do it. Excellent. I'll coordinate with Dr. Webb and send your mother all the details. Principal Mitchell leaned back in her chair. Tommy, I have to be honest. When I heard about your science fair project, I thought maybe you'd been a bit too ambitious. I'm very glad to have been proven wrong. Walking back to English class, Tommy felt like he was floating. His hands were still shaking, but now it was from excitement instead of fear. NASA. Actual NASA had noticed his project, had read his research, thought it was remarkable. By lunchtime, word had gotten around. Tommy didn't know how. Maybe a secretary had mentioned it. Maybe Principal Mitchell had told a teacher. However it happened, people knew. In the cafeteria, students were whispering and pointing at him. But it was different now. Not mocking, more like confused curiosity. Jake and his friends were sitting at their usual table, and they'd gone quiet when Tommy walked by. Ashley, the girl who'd won first place at the science fair, came up to his library table. Hey, is it true? NASA really contacted the school about your project? Yeah, Tommy said. I'm presenting to them on Thursday. She looked impressed. Actually impressed. That's amazing. I remember your project. The judges totally didn't give it enough time. Congratulations. After she left, a few other students came by. Some were genuinely happy for him. Some were probably just being nosy, but nobody was laughing anymore. That night, Tommy went back into the garage for the first time in weeks. He pulled out the plastic bin with his prototype pieces. He unrolled his display board. Everything was still there, exactly how he'd left it. His mom came home and found him reassembling the filtration system, making sure everything still worked. I knew it, she said from the doorway. I knew someone would see what you did. Mom, what if I mess up the presentation? What if I forget everything? These are actual NASA engineers. She walked over and squeezed his shoulder. Baby, you know this project inside and out. You've been living and breathing this research for 2 years. Just talk to them the same way you'd explain it to me. Be yourself. The next 2 days were a blur. Tommy could barely focus in any of his classes. He kept going over his presentation in his head. He rewrote his notes 5 times. He practiced in front of the bathroom mirror until his mom told him he was making himself crazy. Mr. Harrison pulled him aside after science class. I heard about NASA. That's incredible, Tommy. I have to admit I underestimated your project. I should have been more supportive. Tommy didn't know what to say to that. Part of him wanted to be angry, to point out that everyone had tried to talk him out of it. But mostly he just felt nervous about Thursday. Wednesday night, Tommy barely slept. He kept having dreams where his computer froze during the video call, or he forgot how to speak English, or his prototype exploded in the middle of his presentation. Every anxiety his brain could manufacture played out in vivid detail. Thursday morning arrived. Tommy put on his nicest shirt, the one his mom had bought him for his cousin's wedding last year. She'd ironed it for him and made him eat breakfast even though his stomach was in knots. You've got this, she said, hugging him at the door. Remember, they already think your work is remarkable. This is your chance to show them why. At school, Principal Mitchell met him at the library. The conference room was set up with a big monitor and camera. The tech guy from the IT department was there to make sure everything worked. A few teachers had gathered to watch, including Mr. Harrison. "We go live in 5 minutes," the IT guy said. "You ready?" Tommy nodded, even though he wasn't sure ready was the right word. Terrified might be more accurate, but it was too late to back out now. The screen flickered on. Suddenly, Tommy was looking at a room full of people in Houston, about 15 engineers and scientists all sitting around a conference table, and right in the center was a black woman with short natural hair and kind eyes. She was smiling. "Hello, Tommy," she said. "I'm Dr. Catherine Webb. Thank you so much for meeting with us today. We're all very excited to hear about your water filtration research." Tommy took a deep breath. This was it. The moment that would either prove everyone wrong or prove everyone right. He started talking. For the first 30 seconds, Tommy's voice shook so badly he had to stop and clear his throat. His hands were trembling as he held his notes. Through the screen, he could see all those NASA engineers watching him, waiting. His brain kept screaming that he didn't belong here, that he was about to embarrass himself in front of actual rocket scientists. Then Dr. Webb smiled at him. Not a polite smile, a real one. "Take your time, Tommy. We're just here to listen and learn." Something about the way she said it calmed him down. These weren't the science fair judges who'd barely given him 4 minutes. These people had actually read his research. They wanted to be here. They wanted to hear what he had to say. Tommy started again, and this time his voice was steady. Current water filtration systems on the International Space Station use a lot of mechanical and chemical processes. They work, but they're heavy and they need constant power. I started wondering if there was a way to use natural biological processes instead, similar to how wetlands filter water on Earth. He pulled up his first slide, showing diagrams of his prototype. "I designed a system using beneficial bacteria, specifically a biofilm of microorganisms that naturally break down contaminants. The bacteria do most of the work, so the system needs about 60% less energy than traditional filters." One of the engineers leaned forward. "What specific bacterial strains are you using?" Tommy had practiced for this. "Primarily Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter for ammonia processing, with some Pseudomonas for organic compound breakdown. I cultivated them from natural sources and created stable colonies in controlled conditions." He saw a few people taking notes. That was good. He kept going. The biggest challenge was maintaining the right balance. Too many bacteria and they'd consume all the oxygen and die. Too few, and they couldn't keep up with filtration demands. I had to run over 30 different trials to find the optimal colony density. Tommy clicked to his next slide, showing his data charts, rows and rows of measurements. pH levels, bacterial counts, water quality tests, all handwritten in his binder, but he'd made them into neat digital graphs for this presentation. Dr. Webb was studying the charts carefully. "This is impressive documentation for someone working in a home garage. How did you ensure sterile conditions?" "I couldn't afford an autoclave, so I used pressure cooker sterilization for my equipment. It's not as good as professional lab equipment, but studies show it can achieve about 98% sterilization if you do it right. I sanitized everything between trials and used disposable filters when I could afford them." A man with gray hair spoke up. "What about long-term stability? Bacterial colonies can mutate or become unbalanced over time." This was the part Tommy was most proud of. "That's actually where I think this system has the most potential." In trials lasting up to 3 months, the colonies self-regulated. When conditions changed, the bacteria adapted naturally instead of dying off like they would in a purely chemical system. "It's more resilient," the questions kept coming. Technical questions about flow rates and contamination thresholds and energy efficiency. Questions about his testing methodology. Questions about how he'd calculated his results. Tommy answered them all. Some answers he knew instantly. Some he had to think about, flipping through his notes or pulling up specific data. And the incredible thing was, he wasn't just surviving. He was having a conversation. These NASA engineers were treating him like a colleague, not a kid. They challenged his assumptions, asked him to explain his reasoning, suggested alternative approaches he hadn't considered. It felt amazing. 45 minutes in, Tommy was explaining his prototype design when Dr. Webb interrupted gently. "Tommy, I want to make sure we're clear about something. You built this entire system for under $200? "Yes, ma'am. Most of it was recycled materials. The bacteria I grew myself from samples. The most expensive thing was probably the aquarium pump, and I got that broken from a thrift store and fixed it. The engineers exchanged looks. One of them let out a low whistle. That's remarkable, Dr. Webb said. Some of our lab prototypes cost tens of thousands of dollars, and you've achieved similar filtration results with pocket change and creativity. Another engineer chimed in. The resourcefulness is what impresses me most. You couldn't just order specialized equipment, so you figured out workarounds. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need for long-term space missions, where astronauts won't have access to Earth-based supply chains. Tommy felt his chest swell with pride. These were people who designed life support systems for actual spacecraft, and they were impressed with his work. The work that had placed dead last at the science fair. The work that Jake had called a pile of junk. Dr. Webb checked her watch. We're coming up on 90 minutes. Tommy, before we wrap up, I want to share something with you. We've been developing next-generation life support systems for the Artemis program. The missions that will eventually put humans back on the moon. One of our biggest challenges is reducing weight and power consumption for lunar habitats. She pulled up a slide on her end. This is our current filtration prototype. It works, but it's heavy and power-hungry. Your biofilm approach could potentially solve both problems. The bacteria are self-sustaining, they're lightweight, and they need minimal energy input once established. Tommy couldn't believe what he was hearing. His idea, his garage project, could actually help put people on the moon? Now you're only 16, Dr. Webb continued, and you're still in high school. But we have a summer research program at Johnson Space Center for exceptional young scientists. Normally our youngest interns are college freshmen, but we'd like to make an exception in your case. Would you be interested in spending 8 weeks this summer working with our team? Tommy's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind him, he heard Principal Mitchell gasp. Mr. Harrison was grinning. Yes, absolutely. I'd love that, Dr. Webb smiled. Excellent. We'll work out the details with your school and your family. There's a stipend and we'll arrange housing. You'll be working directly with our life support systems team, helping us develop and test biofilm filtration for lunar applications. One of the other engineers spoke up. Fair warning, kid. We're going to work you hard. You'll be in the lab every day, running tests, analyzing data, writing reports. Think you can handle that? Tommy laughed. He couldn't help it. Sir, I spent 2 years working in a garage by myself because nobody thought this was possible. I think I can handle it. The engineers laughed too. Dr. Webb stood up and the others followed. Tommy, thank you for your time today. We're going to send over all the program information. We'll be in touch very soon. The screen went dark. Tommy sat there for a moment, not quite believing what had just happened. Then Principal Mitchell started clapping and the teachers joined in. Mr. Harrison came over and shook his hand. That was incredible. Tommy, you knocked it out of the park. Word spread through Jefferson High School faster than a wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone knew. The kid who'd been mocked for his science project was going to NASA. The project that placed last at the regional fair had caught the attention of actual aerospace engineers. In the hallway after final bell, Tommy walked past Jake and his friends. They all went quiet. Tommy didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look on their faces said everything. Ashley caught up with him by his locker. Everyone's talking about your NASA presentation. That's seriously cool. Thanks, Tommy said, still feeling a bit dazed. Can I ask you something? She lowered her voice. Were you scared? When they were asking all those technical questions? Tommy thought about it. Terrified, but also kind of excited. Like even if I messed up, at least someone was finally taking my work seriously. That evening, Tommy's mom came home to find him back in the garage. Not working on his project, but just sitting there, looking at everything. How you feeling, baby? She asked. Like maybe I'm dreaming, Tommy admitted. A month ago, I was ready to throw all this away. Everyone told me it was stupid. The judges barely looked at it. And now NASA wants me to spend my summer in Houston. His mom sat down next to him. You know what the difference was? One person actually looked. One person took the time to see what you'd really done instead of judging it by how it looked. That's all it took, Dr. Webb, Tommy said. She actually read my binder. The judges at the fair didn't even flip through it. That's the thing about being ahead of your time, his mom said. Most people won't recognize it. But you only need one person who understands. One person who sees the value in what you're doing. Dr. Webb was that person for you. Tommy nodded. He kept thinking about the video call, replaying it in his mind. The way the engineers had leaned forward when he explained his bacterial colonies, the questions they'd asked, genuinely curious about his answers, the respect in their voices when they talked about his resourcefulness. "I'm going to work at NASA," he said out loud, testing how the words felt. "Me, the kid who built a science project from garage junk." His mom squeezed his shoulder. "Not junk. Never junk. You built something that could help astronauts live on the moon. Don't you ever forget that." That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. But this time it wasn't from anxiety. It was from excitement. He kept thinking about the summer, about working in a real NASA laboratory, about the things he'd learn, the people he'd meet, the projects he'd help with. He thought about everyone who doubted him. Not with anger, but with understanding. They hadn't been able to see it, because it didn't look like what they expected. It didn't come from a fancy school or an expensive lab. It came from a teenager in a garage who wouldn't give up on an idea. But here's the thing Tommy was starting to understand. The people who'd laughed at him hadn't been wrong because his project was good. They'd been wrong because they'd stopped looking. They'd made assumptions based on appearance instead of substance. And in doing so, they'd almost convinced Tommy to give up on something that actually mattered. Thank goodness Dr. Webb had been willing to look deeper. Thank goodness she'd asked to see his research instead of judging by the display board. Thank goodness someone at NASA had been paying attention when everyone else had moved on. As Tommy finally drifted off to sleep, he made himself a promise. When he was older, when he was the one evaluating other people's work, he'd always look deeper. He'd always give people the chance to prove themselves. Because you never knew when the next great idea might come from the most unexpected place. The news hit the local media first. A reporter from the town newspaper showed up at Jefferson High School, wanting to interview Tommy about the NASA internship. Then a TV station called. Then another one. Within a week, Tommy's story was everywhere. Local teens' science project catches. NASA's attention, from last place to NASA. One student's journey. High school student to work on lunar life support systems. Tommy tried to stay normal about it, but it was impossible. Students he'd never talked to were suddenly wanting selfies with him. Teachers who'd barely noticed him before were stopping him in the hallways to say congratulations. The principal put up a banner in the main office. "Congratulations, Tommy Rodriguez, NASA Summer Research Program." But the most interesting change was happening behind the scenes. Tommy found out later that the regional science fair organizers had called an emergency meeting after Tommy's story broke. They were embarrassed. Really embarrassed. How had their judges completely missed a project that NASA considered remarkable? The fair director reached out to Principal Mitchell with an apology and a plan. They were implementing new judge training to focus on scientific merit, rather than presentation polish. They were creating a rubric that valued innovation and research depth. They were making changes so the next Tommy wouldn't slip through the cracks. Better late than never, Tommy's mom said when he told her. She still hadn't forgiven those judges for making her son feel like a failure. At school, Mr. Harrison approached Tommy after class one day. "I've been thinking about what happened with your project, about how I tried to talk you out of it." He looked uncomfortable. "I told myself I was being realistic, helping you aim for something achievable. But really, I was just scared you'd fail and I'd feel responsible." "It's okay," Tommy said. "No, it's not. Teachers are supposed to help students reach higher, not pull them down to safer ground. I want to do better." Mr. Harrison pulled out a folder. "I've been working on a proposal for an advanced research class, a place where students can work on ambitious, long-term projects without worrying about whether they'll look good at science fairs. Would you help me design the curriculum?" Tommy took the folder, flipping through the proposal. It was actually really good, a class focused on real scientific research, with mentorship and resources for students who wanted to go deep on complex topics. "Yeah," Tommy said. "I'd love to help with this." The biggest surprise came from an unexpected source. Jake, the kid who'd posted that mocking video, showed up at Tommy's locker one afternoon. He looked nervous. "Hey," Jake said. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Tommy closed his locker. "Sure." Jake shoved his hands in his pockets. "Look, I was a complete jerk about your science project. The video, the comments, all of it. I was wrong. What you did was actually incredible, and I was too stupid to see it." "Why'd you do it?" Tommy asked. "Not angry, just curious," Jake sighed. "Honestly, because everyone else was laughing and I wanted to fit in. And maybe because I was jealous, you were brave enough to try something crazy, and I've never had the guts to do anything like that. Easier to make fun of you than to admit I was impressed. Tommy hadn't expected that level of honesty. Thanks for apologizing. That took guts too. Jake nodded and walked away. Tommy watched him go, thinking about how fear made people do weird things. Jake had been scared of not fitting in. Mr. Harrison had been scared of Tommy failing. The judges had been scared of taking a project seriously that didn't look professional. Fear had almost killed Tommy's dream. But one person's curiosity had saved it. The weeks leading up to summer flew by. Tommy had to get caught up on schoolwork he'd fallen behind on during his depressed weeks. NASA sent a massive packet of information about the internship. Housing assignments, lab safety training, research expectations, reading materials about current life support systems. Tommy devoured it all. He watched every video, read every document, studied the schematics of the ISS filtration systems. By the time school let out for summer, he was ready. His mom drove him to the airport. Tommy had never been on a plane before. Had never been out of state, actually. Now he was flying to Houston to work at NASA's Johnson Space Center. It felt surreal. You call me every day, his mom said at the security checkpoint, hugging him tight. And baby, I'm so proud of you I could burst. I love you, Mom. Thank you for never telling me I couldn't do it. That's because I knew you could. Houston was hot, like really hot, and humid in a way that made Tommy's hometown feel like the Arctic. But the Johnson Space Center was everything he'd dreamed of. The buildings, the Mission Control Center, the training facilities where astronauts prepared for space. Dr. Webb met him on his first day. Welcome to NASA, Tommy. Ready to get to work? The next 8 weeks were the hardest and best of Tommy's life. He worked 10-hour days in the life support systems lab. He learned how to use professional equipment that cost more than his mom's car. He ran experiments, analyzed data, wrote reports, attended meetings with engineers who'd been doing this for decades, and they treated him like he belonged there, not like a kid who'd gotten lucky, like a researcher whose ideas had value. Tommy's biofilm filtration concept became part of a larger project exploring biological systems for lunar habitats. His work wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was going into actual NASA research papers. His name was going to be in the citations. One day, about halfway through the summer, Dr. Webb took Tommy on a tour of Mission Control. They stood in the same room where people had guided Apollo missions to the moon, where the Mars rovers were controlled. Where history happened, see that? Dr. Webb pointed to a photo on the wall. A diverse group of young engineers from the 1960s. Those people were considered too young, too inexperienced, too unconventional. But NASA took a chance on them, and they helped put humans on the moon. Now we're preparing to go back and we're taking chances on people like you. Tommy stared at the photo. Do you think my filtration system will actually get used? Like on a real mission? Honestly, maybe not. The system needs years more development and testing. But that's not the point. The point is you proved that brilliant ideas can come from anywhere. You proved that resourcefulness and creativity matter as much as expensive equipment. You proved that a 16-year-old in a garage can contribute to space exploration. That matters more than any single invention. On Tommy's last day at NASA, the life support team threw him a small going-away party. They gave him a certificate and a team photo and a challenge coin. A NASA tradition. Dr. Webb pulled him aside. We want you to come back next summer if you're interested, and when you're applying to colleges, let me know. I'm happy to write a recommendation letter. Flying home, Tommy thought about how different everything was now. He wasn't the weird kid with impossible dreams anymore. He was a researcher with published work and NASA, connections and actual evidence that his ideas mattered. But the best part came when school started again in the fall. Tommy had been nervous about how to start the advanced research class Mr. Harrison had proposed. The school had approved it and 15 students had signed up. Tommy wasn't teaching it, obviously, but he'd helped design it and Mr. Harrison had asked him to speak on the first day. He walked into the classroom and saw a mix of students. Some were top of their class. Some were average. Some looked nervous. All of them looked curious. My name's Tommy Rodriguez, he started. Last year I built a science project that placed dead last at the regional science fair. People laughed at it. Called it trash. Told me I was stupid for trying something so ambitious. He had their attention now. Then someone from NASA actually looked at my research, really looked at it. And that changed everything. I spent this summer working at Johnson Space Center, helping develop life support systems for lunar missions. One student raised her hand. What made you keep going when everyone was laughing? Tommy thought about it. Honestly, I almost didn't. I was ready to give up. But my mom reminded me that the project was real. The science worked. And just because other people couldn't see it, didn't make it less true. So I guess my advice is this. If you're working on something you believe in, something that actually matters, don't let other people's doubt become your doubt. Another student spoke up. But what if we fail? What if our projects don't work? Then you learn something, Tommy said. I failed about 30 times before my filtration system worked. Every failure taught me what not to do. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of success. After class, a freshman girl came up to him. She was small, quiet, reminded Tommy of himself a year ago. I want to design better prosthetics, she said softly, like artificial limbs that can actually feel things. But everyone says that's impossible for a high school project. Tommy smiled. You know what? Last year everyone said my project was impossible too. Start small, do research, build prototypes, and don't worry about whether it looks good for a science fair. Focus on whether it actually works. That's what matters. Her eyes lit up. Really? Really? And if you need help or someone to bounce ideas off, I'm around. Mr. Harrison's going to help connect students with mentors too. You're not alone in this. Over the next few months, Tommy watched that research class grow into something special. Students were working on projects about renewable energy, medical devices, environmental solutions, artificial intelligence, ambitious stuff, scary stuff, the kind of stuff that might fail, but they were trying, and that was the whole point. Tommy's story spread beyond his school. He was invited to speak at other schools, at science teacher conferences, at youth STEM events. He always told the same basic story. The dream, the mockery, the rejection, the person who looked deeper, the vindication. But he always ended with the same message. Your worth isn't determined by who recognizes it. Truth is truth, whether anyone sees it or not. Keep working. Keep believing. Keep building. Someone will eventually look. College acceptance letters started arriving in the spring. MIT, Caltech, Stanford, every school he applied to, all of them mentioning his NASA research, all of them offering scholarships. Tommy chose MIT, their aerospace engineering program. At graduation, Tommy gave a speech as salutatorian. He thanked his mom, who cried in the audience. He thanked Mr. Harrison for creating the research class. He thanked Dr. Webb and NASA for taking a chance on him, and then he said something that made a lot of people uncomfortable. I also want to thank the science fair judges who placed my project last, and the students who laughed at me, and everyone who told me my dreams were too big, because you taught me that external validation doesn't determine value. You taught me to trust my own work even when nobody else does. You taught me resilience. So thank you for that lesson, even though I'm sure you didn't mean to teach it. The audience was quiet for a moment. Then they started clapping. After the ceremony, Jake found Tommy in the crowd. They'd become friendly over the year, not close friends, but on good terms. That was a classy way to call us all out, Jake said, grinning. Tommy laughed. I wasn't trying to call anyone out. I meant it. I learned something important from that whole experience. What's that? That being underestimated is only a problem if you start to believe it. The judges saw trash. NASA saw potential. The only difference was who was willing to really look. Years later, Tommy would finish his PhD in aerospace engineering. He'd work on actual lunar habitat designs. He'd see his biofilm filtration research cited in papers about sustainable space exploration. He'd give talks around the world about innovation and perseverance, but he never forgot that science fair. The humiliation, the self-doubt, the moment he almost gave up.